I always believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet long enough, and gave generously enough, I would eventually earn my father's love, or at the very least, his respect. That belief fueled everything I did in my 20s. I worked 3 jobs through college, saved every dime I could, and lived below my means even when I started making 6 figures. When I finally broke ground on my first home at 33, it wasn't just about real estate. It was about finally having something of my own, something untouched by obligation or compromise. A place where my name alone would be on the deed, and no one could diminish what it took to get there. But even then, a part of me wanted him to be proud. Just once. I thought showing him the blueprints, walking him through the frame, would stir something in him that hadn't stirred in decades. Instead, all he said was, "You did this without me?" Not a smile, not a pat on the back. Just that flat voice that always made me feel like I had done something wrong. My dad, Raymond, was the kind of man who showed up big for other people, especially when it meant looking good in public. When I was little, it was just him and me, until I turned 9, and he married Dolores, a woman who smiled like she was apologizing. She came with a daughter, Tanya, who was barely 3. And from that day forward, Tanya became the center of his universe. I became the dependable one. The helper, the sitter, the invisible backbone of the family. Every birthday, every graduation, every scraped knee, every car issue, they'd call me. And I always answered, because I thought being needed was the same as being loved. Even when my father started referring to Tanya as his baby and introduced me as his eldest, like I was some distant relative at family cookouts, I convinced myself it didn't matter. I had my own lane. I just had to stay in it. I didn't realize how wide that chasm had grown until the day I showed them the finished house. It was a Saturday. I'd planned a small gathering, nothing extravagant, just a few friends, my cousin Naima, and, reluctantly, my father and his family. The house was still echoing with newness. Bright white walls, untouched hardwood floors, the scent of fresh paint hanging in the air. I stood by the kitchen island, glass of champagne in hand, waiting for him to say something. Anything. Instead, he walked around with his arms crossed, Tanya and her husband trailing behind him like tourists. I could see it on her face, entitlement masked as curiosity. "So," my father finally said, his voice louder than necessary. I was thinking, this would be perfect for Tanya and Derek to stay in for a while, just until they get back on their feet. They've got the baby, and it's tough out there for young families. The room went quiet so fast, I could hear the carbonation fizz in my glass. I looked at him, then at her, and for a split second, I felt like I'd been cast in a play I didn't audition for. "No," I said. Just that. One word. But it echoed like a slap. My father's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, no?" Tanya's eyes went wide with performative offense. "This is your family," he added, louder now, as if the volume would make me more obedient. "They need this more than you. You don't have kids. You can live anywhere." I should have argued. I should have raised my voice. But instead, I set my glass down, wiped my hands on my jeans, and simply said, "No one's living here but me." That's when he lost it. Before I could step back, he shoved me, hard, and when I stumbled, he followed it with a closed fist to my face. Right there, in front of everyone. My jaw cracked sideways, my ears rang, and for a second, I tasted blood. The silence afterward was suffocating. No one moved. Not even Tanya. I looked at him, not crying, not yelling, just looking. Then I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't call the police. I didn't even sleep that night. I sat on my apartment floor, lights off, ice pack on my face, thinking about every time I had dropped everything for him. Paid his mortgage when he was behind. Covered Tanya's tuition one semester. Let them use my car for a few days, that turned into 4 months. All of it came rushing back like floodwaters breaking a dam. I picked up my phone, opened the bank app, and one by one, began shutting the doors. Rent? Gone. Access to my cards? Revoked. His phone number? Blocked. I moved like a surgeon, precise, calm, and with no intention of saving the patient. By morning, I had done the one thing he never expected. I let him go. The first time he brought it up, I thought he was joking. It was a week before the housewarming. We were standing outside the shell of the house. No doors, no windows yet, just the skeleton of the place I had poured my blood and years into. He looked around like he was appraising property, not marveling at his child's success. "So, what's the plan?" he asked. "You gonna stay here alone?" I shrugged, already sensing where it was headed. "For now, it's not a big place, just what I need." He laughed, not a kind one, the kind that starts in the nose and never reaches the eyes. "Well, you know Tanya and Derek been having a hard time. Baby on the way. That old apartment's got mold. Wouldn't kill you to help." I didn't answer him. I just looked down at the dirt beneath my boots and thought about all the times I helped when it nearly killed me. The credit card I maxed out paying off their emergency bills. The weekends I babysat for free while working night shifts. The loan that was never repaid. The promise that was never kept. My father had never once asked me what I needed, but he had always been generous with what I had. The ask wasn't really an ask. It was a setup. Over the next few days, the comments kept coming. Always casual, always public. This guest room would be perfect for a crib. You've got all this space and no one to share it with. And then he got bold. "You know, back in my day, family didn't turn their back on each other. They sacrificed." That word stuck to me like gum under a shoe. I sacrificed birthdays, weekends, peace, credit scores. I had sacrificed myself for his approval. And now, because I had something worth protecting, I was selfish? The day of the housewarming, I told myself to be civil, to keep the peace. I invited him because some foolish part of me still wanted him to witness what I'd built. Not just the physical home, but the life I had constructed piece by hard-earned peace. Naima brought cupcakes. My best friend Khalil came through with a Bluetooth speaker and his usual over-the-top playlists. Laughter filled the kitchen, sunlight poured through the bare windows, and for a brief moment, it felt like I had done something good, something worth celebrating. And then he cornered me by the stairwell. It wasn't a discussion. It was a declaration. I told Tanya and Derek to start packing. They'll be moving in next week. You can crash with Khalil or something. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like my new home was just another extension of his power. I stood there stunned. The audacity wrapped itself around me like a winter chill. "They're not moving in," I said slowly, measuring each word like a heartbeat. "This is my house. No one gets to live here without my permission." His face changed. The tone of it all shifted. First came disbelief, then offense. "You ungrateful child," he hissed. "After everything I've done for you?" He said it so loud. The music paused and heads turned. "You think you're better than them? Just 'cause you made some money? You're selfish. Cold. You'll die alone in this big, empty house." I didn't respond. I didn't know him a response. But he wasn't finished. "You know what your problem is?" he bellowed. "You think you're above family. But you're not. You're just bitter and barren." That word sliced. Barren. It echoed in my gut. My chest burned with something I couldn't name. Rage, shame, maybe both. And before I could move or blink or react, he punched me. Just like that. In front of a dozen people, his fist collided with my jaw and the room stopped breathing. I didn't fall. I didn't cry. I stood there with blood on my tongue and silence in my bones. Khalil jumped between us. Naima yelled something. Tanya gasped but didn't move. No one tried to apologize. No one begged him to stop. Because no one was surprised. That was the part that hurt the most. I walked out the door. Alone. Again. Just like I always did. That night, I sat in the new living room. Boxes still stacked. Lights not yet installed. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear anyone's excuses, anyone's attempts to downplay what happened. My cheek throbbed. But what hurt more was knowing how many people had watched and done nothing. I'd spent years begging for crumbs of approval from a man who would strike me when I finally said no. The next morning, I woke up different. Not stronger. Not yet. Just clear. I opened my laptop, logged into the rental management portal, and canceled the monthly payment I'd been sending to cover Tanya's lease. Then I opened my bank's user access page and removed him from everything: credit cards, checking, savings. I blocked his number, knowing he'd try to call. And when he finally did, using Tanya's phone, I picked up once. "You better fix this," he snapped, "or you're gonna regret it. I'll cut you off for good." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I said, "You can't cut off someone who's already walked away." Then I hung up. Grief doesn't always come with sobs or funerals. Sometimes it walks in quietly, barefoot and bitter, and settles into your living room with the patience of a squatter. That first morning after cutting him off, I woke up on the floor of my new house, still without furniture, my face stiff with dried blood and shame. I hadn't cried, not once, but my body felt like it had. My eyes burned, my chest ached, and there was a dull tremble in my fingers I couldn't stop. It wasn't the punch that broke me. It was the years leading up to it. The endless pattern of me giving and him taking, of me hoping and him humiliating. And now, finally, there was nothing left to give. For the first time in my life, I had truly said goodbye, not with words, but with silence, with access revoked and boundaries held. I spent that day cleaning, wiping down counters that had barely collected dust. It was less about tidying and more about scrubbing the residue of him out of the space. I tossed out the housewarming card he left and signed, deleted the voicemail Tanya left that night, something about how he didn't mean it and that everyone gets pushed too far sometimes. She wanted to meet, talk face to face. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She was silent when I got hit. She was silent when he insulted me in front of a room full of people. Silence is a choice. And so was mine. Around noon, my cousin Naima stopped by unannounced. She didn't bring pity, just 2 coffees and a stare that could see through me. "You need to document that bruise," she said. "No hello, no small talk." I nodded. She snapped a photo on her phone. "If he ever tries to twist the story, this is your receipt." That's why I loved Naima. She didn't feed me softness when I needed steel. She knew that being hurt by your father wasn't just about pain. It was about narrative, about who gets to tell the story afterward and who gets buried beneath it. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," she said as we sat on the back steps, "but I'm proud of you. You've been bailing him out for years, and he's been using your kindness like a credit card with no limit." I didn't respond. I just stared out at the backyard, empty and overgrown. "You know he's going to try to spin this, right?" She continued. "To the family, to his friends. You're the villain now. The ungrateful child who abandoned her daddy." I swallowed hard. That part had already begun. 2 days later, Aunt Vivian called. Sweet, churchy voice laced with thinly veiled judgment. "I heard there was a little disagreement at your party. You know your father's under a lot of stress. That man has high blood pressure. Sometimes we say things we don't mean." I nearly laughed. He didn't just say something. He hit me. In public. But of course, that part wasn't in the version he told her. I told her calmly that I didn't want to discuss it. "Well," she sniffed, "just don't throw away your whole family over one mistake." One mistake. That was the word they used when it wasn't their face he hit, when it wasn't their house he tried to take. That call ended quickly. The fallout spread quietly but steadily. Social media got quieter. Family group chats dried up. No one outright condemned me, but their absence said enough. Tanya posted a cryptic meme about loyalty going both ways. Derek made a passive-aggressive comment on Khalil's photo. "Must be nice to have friends who don't turn on you." I watched it all without engaging. I wasn't going to play the villain in their performance. Let them throw their tantrums. I had locked the doors. But it wasn't easy. At night, the silence in the house screamed. Every creak felt accusatory. I kept running the memory back in my mind. His voice, the punch, the way no one rushed to my side. The worst part was realizing how accustomed I'd become to being disregarded. For years, I wore his neglect like a badge of honor. I thought if I endured long enough, he'd finally see my worth. Turns out, the only thing he saw was an ATM. And when I said no, he threw a tantrum like a child denied candy. One evening, as I unpacked a box of books, I found an old photo. Me at 13, holding Tanya's hand at her birthday party. My father stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, beaming with pride. I had baked that cake, cleaned the whole house, but I wasn't even in the official photos. That picture was the only one I had from that day, and I wasn't even centered. I stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half and dropping it in the trash. That was the night I let the grief in. I sat on the floor again, knees tucked to my chest, and finally let the tears fall. For the little girl who was told to be quiet. For the teenager who paid for her own prom dress while her father bought Tanya a car. For the woman who built a home just to be told she didn't deserve it. I cried for all the years I bent myself into a shape he never bothered to admire. And then, when the tears dried, I stood up. The grief had visited, but it wouldn't stay. Not anymore. By the end of the week, I had started to furnish the house, piece by piece. A couch I chose without anyone's input. Artwork I bought because it made me feel something. A dinner table that could seat 6, even if I ate alone. I wasn't building a home for forgiveness or reconciliation. I was building a home for peace. And peace doesn't require permission. Peace was not the absence of noise. It was the absence of expectation. And that, more than anything, was what I had earned when I cut my father off. No more surprise texts asking for a little help this month. No more guilt-laced voicemails about how hard things were for Tanya and Derek. No more sudden visits where he'd walk through my apartment like he was inspecting property, hinting at how a real man would share. For the first time in over a decade, I didn't wake up feeling like I owed someone something. But peace has a strange weight. It doesn't lift you. It grounds you. And for a while, I wasn't sure if that grounding was healing or just another form of solitude I had yet to name. The attempts at reconciliation came quickly, but never with apology. 3 days after our last call, he emailed me. The subject line just said family matters. The body of the message was short. I don't agree with how you handled things, but I'm willing to let bygones be bygones. Let's talk. I didn't respond. The language said everything. You handled things. Not I hit you. Not I embarrassed you. Just passive phrasing designed to skip over accountability. I deleted it without reading it twice. 2 days later, Tanya called from a different number. I didn't answer. She texted instead, "Dad's not doing well. This stress is affecting his health. You don't have to talk to him, but please stop punishing the rest of us." I stared at the message for a long time before locking the phone. Punishing. That's what they called it. Me choosing silence over submission was framed as punishment. But wasn't I the one who got hurt? Wasn't I the one left standing in my own blood while they watched? I wasn't punishing them. I was just done. The whispers started next. Khalil called one afternoon, hesitant. "Hey. Not trying to stir anything, but someone posted about you on Facebook. It's vague, but I think it's about what happened." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. I knew how these things spread. A little pity party post about how some people forget where they come from. Maybe even a dramatic line like, "When you try to help family and they turn on you." Tanya knew how to manipulate sympathy. My father taught her well. For a brief moment, I considered replying. Writing my own post, laying out the truth with screenshots and photos of the bruise. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was the deep, painful knowledge that no matter how much proof I offered, some people would still side with the abuser. They always do. Because it's easier to believe the successful one is cold than to accept that a father could betray his child so openly. I stayed quiet, but not passive. Every day, I poured myself into my house. The walls slowly filled with color. I painted one room a soft sage green, calming, grounded, alive. I hung up framed quotes that reminded me who I was becoming. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. That one went above the fireplace. Naima came by often, helping with shelves and drilling curtain rods, always humming to herself like the presence of peace didn't need to be loud. "You know," she said one afternoon while folding boxes, "people are uncomfortable with boundaries when they're used to walking all over you." I smiled, tired but affirmed. I think I'm finally okay with people being uncomfortable. That night, I received a letter. An actual letter, envelope, stamp, the whole thing. It was from my father. His handwriting was familiar, but tighter, more rushed. The message was short. "You were never grateful. You got your little house. Now you think you're better than the rest of us. Don't come crawling back when that house gets cold and empty." I folded it twice and slid it into a drawer, not to keep it, but to remember, to remind myself of what I was leaving behind. There was no remorse in his words, just bitterness, just the echo of a man who thought love was transactional and loyalty was owed, not earned. But not everyone believed his version. A week later, I got a message from Uncle Marcus. We weren't close, but he was one of the few in the family who had ever shown me consistent kindness. The message read, Saw what happened. Don't let the noise fool you. I know who you are. Proud of you. It was short, but it hit harder than any of their passive-aggressive guilt trips. I sat with it, let it warm the parts of me that had grown cold from the silence. Sometimes validation doesn't roar. It whispers. Still, the loneliness didn't vanish. There were moments, quiet ones, late at night, where I'd feel the tug of doubt. Was I being too harsh? Was there a version of this where I could have forgiven and still held my boundaries? But those questions always led back to the same moment. His fist, my face, their silence. And in that clarity, the doubt faded. Healing wasn't linear, but it was mine. It was a rainy Sunday when he came. The kind of rain that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. The front porch light was off, but I saw his shadow through the blinds before I ever heard the knock. He didn't call first. He didn't warn me. He just showed up, soaked to the bone, holding a manila envelope and that same smug sense of entitlement that always followed him like cologne. My heart didn't leap. My breath didn't hitch. I just stood there in the middle of my living room, in a silence so thick I could hear the water dripping from the gutters outside. It was the first time I had ever felt nothing when I saw him. No hope, no fear, just a calm, settled finality. Like watching the credits roll on a film I'd already seen 100 times too many. The knock came, 3 times. Firm. Familiar. I walked to the door, but didn't open it. I spoke through the wood. Solid. Painted navy blue. Chosen by me, for me. You need to leave. He chuckled. That low, condescending kind of laugh. You gonna talk to me through the door, like I'm a stranger? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. You made your point, he said. You hurt my pride. You embarrassed me in front of the family. But enough is enough. That line almost made me laugh. Enough is enough. As if I'd thrown the punch. As if the shame was his to carry and mine to fix. I stepped back from the door and sat on the arm of the couch, letting the silence stretch. After a while, he spoke again, softer this time. You know I was wrong. But you shutting me out like this, it's cruel. You're better than this. And there it was. The manipulation dressed up as remorse. The half-apology wrapped in a guilt trip. My fists clenched, not from anger, but from the effort of staying grounded. I knew this trick. He'd used it 100 times before. Say just enough to sound like he cared, but never enough to actually be sorry. I stood again and walked to the door, my voice steady. I built this house without you, I said. I bled for this. I worked years for this. And the first thing you did when you walked inside was try to give it away like it was yours to offer. Then, when I said no, you hit me. In front of people I love. And not once since have you said you're sorry. Not once. He was quiet. I kept going. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because I finally realized. Loving you was costing me myself. He sighed. That long, theatrical exhale he used whenever I said something he couldn't refute. So that's it. You're just going to cut your own father out of your life. I didn't cut you out, I said. You were never really in. I heard him shift. The rustle of the envelope. I brought some papers. Old photos. Stuff your mother left behind. My chest tightened for a moment. A flicker of something tried to rise, but I pushed it down. Leave them on the porch, I said. You can go. He hesitated. I could almost hear him wrestling with the fact that he no longer had access. No longer had a door to walk through. Finally, he muttered, You're making a mistake. One day, you'll need your family. And no one's going to be there. I smiled then. Not out of joy, but out of clarity. That's where you're wrong. I have people. People who didn't watch me get hit and say nothing. People who don't see me as a resource, but as a person. And I'm finally learning that family isn't who shares your blood. It's who honors your boundaries. Then I walked away. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't wait for the sound of retreating footsteps. I went to the kitchen, turned on some music, and started cooking. Not because I was hungry, but because I needed to do something that reminded me life was moving on. That I was moving on. Later, when I went to the porch, the envelope was there, damp around the edges but intact. I brought it inside, set it on the dining table, and didn't open it. That night, Naima came by. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just poured us both a glass of wine and lit a candle. So, she said, how does it feel? Doors finally closed. I nodded, the weight of it still settling in my bones. Quiet, I said. But right. She clinked her glass against mine. To peace. To peace, I echoed. The next morning, I woke up to find the family group chat renamed to Sunday dinner plans. My name was removed. A message thread between Aunt Vivian and Tanya popped up on Facebook, filled with thinly veiled jabs. Some folks think money means morals. Real family doesn't keep score. I didn't respond. I simply archived the chats and closed the app. I wasn't interested in defending myself in courtrooms where I'd already been convicted. Instead, I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and headed out to buy a tree for the front yard. Something tall and flowering. Something with roots. A neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, waved as I returned. "That your tree?" he asked. I nodded. "Looks like it'll grow strong." I smiled. I planned to. Spring arrived like a long exhale. The kind that follows a storm you didn't realize you'd been living through. The days stretched longer, the lights softened, and little signs of new life appeared around the house. Buds on the tree I planted, weeds I didn't mind, birds nesting in the gutters. Every morning, I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, breathing in the stillness I had built from the wreckage of someone else's expectations. It wasn't triumph. Not exactly. It was steadiness, like the ground beneath me finally belonged to me. And as the world outside bloomed, I felt something shift inside too. Not forgiveness, but acceptance. Not closure, but clarity. I hadn't heard from my father in weeks. Not directly. Tanya posted her usual cryptic nonsense. Memes about toxic people cutting off their own blood, and a blurry photo of her child with the caption, "He'll always know who was there for him." The subtext was obvious, but the sting was gone. I no longer felt compelled to explain myself. Let them have their narrative. I had my peace, and peace didn't require defense. One Sunday morning, as I was painting the guest bedroom a muted blue, Khalil stopped by with a toolbox and a grin. "You still ain't mounted that TV, huh?" he joked, pulling out a drill. "A whole house, and still can't hang a bracket." I rolled my eyes but smiled. That was the thing about Khalil. He never asked what I needed. He just showed up. And when we were done, and the screen was level, he sat on the floor beside me, dusting off his hands. "You doing okay?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. "Yeah, I think I'm finally good." He didn't press. Just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, in the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. After a while, he said, "You know, sometimes people think survival is enough. But it's not. You deserve more than surviving your own father." That hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was new, but because someone else said it out loud. And for the first time, I didn't feel crazy for walking away. A week later, I finally opened the envelope he'd left on the porch. There were photos, some of me as a child, others of my mother, faded and curled at the corners. One letter, folded neatly, written in her handwriting. My chest tightened as I read it. It wasn't dramatic, just simple notes to him from when they were still married. Little things like, "Don't forget to pick up milk," and "She asked for you tonight, but you didn't come." That line stopped me. I read it again and again. "She asked for you tonight, but you didn't come." He had always been absent. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. I wasn't mourning a loss. I was mourning the idea of him I had created to survive the reality. The man I waited for. The father I hoped would show up if I just did more, gave more, earned more. But the letter confirmed what I had come to understand. He was never coming, and I no longer needed him to. That night, I sat on the porch with Naima, a bottle of wine between us, our feet up on a cooler. She looked around the yard, at the soft lights I'd strung across the fence, at the tree beginning to bloom. "You built this from scratch," she said, almost in awe. "Not just the house, the life." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "It cost me everything I thought I wanted. But I think I finally got what I needed." She turned to me. "You know what I love most about you? You didn't just set boundaries. You enforced them. That's the part people don't talk about. The backlash, the guilt. But you stood firm." I looked out at the street, quiet and lined with parked cars, the smell of jasmine rising from somewhere nearby. "I used to think strength was about endurance," I said. "But now I know. It's about walking away without needing to be chased." The next morning, I posted one photo. Just me, standing in front of the house, arms crossed, smiling. No caption, no explanation, just presence. A few likes trickled in. A comment from Marcus. This is what healing looks like. I didn't need anything else. Later that week, I hosted a dinner. Just a few close friends, Naima, Khalil, and an old co-worker who'd become like a sister. We ate on the back patio under string lights, laughing too loud, refilling glasses too often. And at one point, I looked around the table and realized I hadn't just rebuilt my life. I had redefined family. No one asked me to apologize. No one asked me to explain. They were just there. And that, finally, was enough. If you've ever had to walk away from someone who should have protected you, know this, you are not alone. Your peace is not a betrayal. Your boundaries are not punishment. Share this story if it resonated with you, and tell us in the comments. When did you finally choose yourself over someone else's comfort? Let's talk about what it means to build a life you don't need to justify. See you soon in the next story.